The air crackled, electric with anticipation. Studio lights bore down on Donald Trump, reflecting off the polished desk, a battleground separating him from Sarah Thorne, host of Primetime Probe. Her smile was a practiced curve, a velvet glove hiding a steel fist. Millions watched, breathlessly awaiting the clash. Thorne, notorious for eviscerating conservative figures, had spent weeks crafting this ambush, a series of questions designed to expose Trump's alleged hypocrisy on family values. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice a honeyed purr laced with arsenic. "You've built an empire, ascended to the presidency, swayed millions. To what do you attribute that?" "Luck." It was a softball question, deceptively simple, but Trump's eyes narrowed, instantly sensing the trap. He leaned forward, a flicker of amusement dancing on his lips. "Luck," he repeated, his voice a low rumble. "Interesting word, Sarah. Liberals love that word. It's a convenient way to dismiss achievement, to pretend hard work and sacrifice are irrelevant." He paused, letting the accusation hang heavy in the air. "But let me tell you, luck doesn't construct skyscrapers." The first beads of sweat appeared on Thorne's perfectly made-up forehead. The question hung in the air, a baited hook shimmering under the studio lights. Thorne's smile tightened, a barely perceptible contraction, like a spider sensing a tremor in its web. This wasn't the docile, compliant response she'd meticulously calculated. Her internal monologue, usually a calm stream of strategic analysis, began to flicker with uncertainty. "So," she began, her voice still smooth but with a newly introduced edge, "you're asserting that everything you've achieved, every building, every deal, every political victory, is solely the product of your own hard work. No assistance, no advantages." She emphasized the word advantages with a subtle, almost imperceptible lift of her eyebrow. A silent accusation. Thorne leaned in, a predator's glint sharpening her eyes. The air in the studio felt thick, charged with unspoken challenges. Trump's voice, when he responded, was like granite, unyielding, imposing. "I'm asserting that success, lasting success, comes to those who earn it, through grit, determination, and an unwavering refusal to yield." He acknowledged her insinuation directly. "Yes, I was given much, a foundation, a name, but I've toiled harder than most can fathom, or would even dare to attempt. Sleepless nights, wrestling with deals that seemed impossibly complex, confronting challenges that would shatter lesser men and women." He added the last two words pointedly, a direct challenge to Thorne's implied narrative. He paused, his gaze unwavering, laser-focused on Thorne, locking her in his sights. But most importantly, he began, deliberately slowing his pace, drawing out the suspense. "I've never..." He masterfully left the sentence unfinished. Thorne's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched, a subtle but unmistakable signal of triumph. This was her opening, the precise vulnerability she'd been meticulously hunting for. "Never..." "What, Mr. Trump?" she asked, her voice a silken whisper, dripping with a predatory sweetness that belied the steel beneath. She believed, with a surge of adrenaline, that she had him cornered. The control room was a tableau of frozen anticipation. Every technician, every producer held their breath, sensing the impending collision. The digital clock on the wall seemed to tick with excruciating slowness. This was the moment the entire interview had been building towards. "Never let down anyone who stood by me, who believed in me, who fought alongside me." Trump finished, his voice regaining its steady, unwavering confidence, a bedrock of conviction. He smoothly, almost imperceptibly, pivoted the conversation, steering it away from the treacherous shoals of personal weakness and towards safer, more advantageous ground. And speaking of those who stand beside me, unwavering in their support, he paused, allowing the implication to settle. Let's discuss family. Let's discuss the bedrock of my life. Let's discuss Melania. He said her name with a mixture of pride and defiance, a gauntlet thrown down at Thorne's feet. Thorne's face subtly shifted, a fleeting flicker of anticipation, the hunter sensing with a thrill that its prey was finally within reach. Ah, yes, Melania, she purred, a knowing, almost conspiratorial smirk playing on her perfectly glossed lips, a figure of considerable intrigue. Many, Mr. Trump, ponder her role in your life, in your empire, in your political ascendancy. Some, and I'm merely relaying the sentiments of a significant portion of the public, suggest she's unusually reticent, shall we say. For the wife of such an extraordinarily influential figure, the studio audience could practically taste the tension, thick and metallic, almost suffocating in the air. It was the palpable silence before a storm. The cameras, like relentless eyes, zoomed in on Trump's face, searching for any fissure, any crack, any hint of weakness in his carefully constructed composure. He knew precisely what was coming, the tired, predictable, and frankly boring assault on his wife's public persona. But he was prepared, his defenses meticulously arrayed. The audience, a sea of faces, watched with rapt attention, a silent, expectant jury. Trump's eyes narrowed, a barely perceptible tightening of his jawline, the only outward sign of the controlled fury simmering beneath the surface. Reticent, he echoed, his voice infused with a hint of sardonic amusement, a subtle mockery of Thorne's carefully chosen word. Perhaps some journalists, Miss Thorne, struggle to differentiate between reticence and the far more admirable quality of dignity. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound emanating from deep within his chest, a sound that carried an undercurrent of challenge. He was subtly shifting the ground, reframing the narrative. Thorne shifted in her chair, visibly taken aback, her perfectly rehearsed composure momentarily disrupted. This wasn't the defensive, apologetic posture she'd anticipated, the easy target she'd envisioned. Her internal calculations were rapidly being revised. Well, she continued, undeterred, her voice regaining its composure, though a trace of uncertainty now lingered beneath the surface. We rarely, if ever, hear her make public pronouncements on matters of policy or politics, unlike other political spouses who are, shall we say, more active, more overtly engaged in the public sphere. Doesn't the public, Mr. Trump, the very public you claim to represent, deserve greater insight, a more comprehensive understanding of the woman who stands behind, or perhaps beside, Donald Trump? She emphasized the behind and beside, subtly suggesting a power dynamic. Trump leaned forward, his body language radiating both pride and a steely resolve. His voice, when he spoke, assumed a tone of unwavering conviction. The public, Ms. Thorne, knows precisely what it needs to know, and frankly, deserves to know about Melania. She's brilliant, undeniably accomplished, and crucially, judicious with her words. A refreshing contrast to some, particularly in the media, who seem to believe that every silence must be filled with vacuous chatter, with self-serving pronouncements, with empty rhetoric. A ripple of approval, spontaneous and undeniable, surged through the live audience, a palpable wave of support. A pin drop could have been heard in the stunned silence that followed, a silence pregnant, with unspoken implications. He had turned the tables. Now she was on the defensive. Thorne's smile faltered, a fleeting but unmistakable crack appearing in her carefully constructed facade of journalistic objectivity. Her usual tactics, honed over years of interviewing and often dismantling powerful figures, were proving surprisingly ineffective against Trump's unwavering defense. But she was far from surrendering. She was a seasoned combatant in the arena of public discourse. She decided to escalate, to shift from subtle insinuation to a more direct, more visceral blow, aiming for the heart of what she perceived as his vulnerability. "Let's address, Mr. Trump, the matter of her accomplishments," she said, her voice acquiring a sharper, more accusatory edge, the velvet glove now completely discarded, revealing the steel fist beneath. "Because some individuals, and I'm simply reflecting a sentiment that exists within certain segments of the population, well, they openly speculate. They wonder whether her greatest accomplishment, her most significant achievement, is, in fact, becoming Mrs. Trump." She delivered the final phrase with a deliberate, almost theatrical emphasis, a verbal stiletto aimed directly at his heart. The temperature in the studio seemed to plummet several degrees. The air suddenly chilled, as if a cold wind had swept through the room. The audience's collective intake of breath was audible, a sharp, collective gasp of shock and anticipation. The cameras, ever present, ever watchful, fixated on Trump, capturing every nuance of his expression, every flicker of emotion, every micro-movement. This was the pivotal moment, the make-or-break question that could define the entire interview, and potentially the careers of both participants. Thorne's producer frantically gestured from the control booth, his face a mask of barely controlled panic, a silent scream etched on his features. He knew, instinctively, that this had crossed a line. Trump's expression, which had been carefully controlled throughout the interview, hardened, transforming into something resembling granite, implacable and unyielding. "Let me be unequivocally crystal clear, Ms. Thorne," he stated, leaning forward, his body language radiating a controlled, contained fury, a simmering volcano of righteous indignation. His voice, when he spoke, was low and menacing, a dangerous rumble that promised a devastating eruption. "You speak of accomplishments. You dare to question Melania's achievements." He paused, allowing the rhetorical question to hang in the air, a challenge and an accusation. "Melania built a thriving, independent career long before she met me. She's represented this nation, our nation, on the world stage with a grace, a dignity, and an intelligence unmatched by any First Lady in recent memory. But of course," he added, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you wouldn't acknowledge that, would you? Because the mainstream media, the institution you so proudly represent, is too preoccupied with peddling its own biased, agenda-driven narrative, too busy tearing down successful women who don't fit neatly into your pre-approved ideological box." Thorne visibly tensed, her carefully composed demeanor starting to unravel. She was losing control of the interview, and the realization was dawning on her with chilling clarity. She attempted a different, less confrontational tactic, hoping to regain some semblance of equilibrium. "Certainly, Mr. Trump, I acknowledge her prior career, but surely you must concede that being married to you, a man of your immense wealth and influence, has undeniably opened certain doors for her, hasn't it? Opportunities that might not have otherwise been available." She tried to sound reasonable, conciliatory, but the desperation was becoming increasingly apparent. Trump chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that sent a shiver down Thorne's spine. "You know what's truly fascinating about your line of inquiry, Ms. Thorne?" he asked, his voice laced with a withering contempt. "It perfectly, almost poetically, encapsulates the fundamental flaw, the inherent bias, in your entire worldview, in the worldview of the mainstream media you represent. Success, real success, isn't about passively walking through open doors. It's about what you do, what you create, what you achieve once you traverse that threshold. And Melania," he said, his voice softening slightly, imbued with genuine admiration, "doesn't merely walk through those doors. She transforms every space she inhabits. She elevates every room she enters. She brings grace, intelligence, and an unwavering dedication to everything she undertakes." The applause from the audience felt like a physical blow to Thorne, a wave of sound crashing over her. She mentally cursed her research team, her producers, herself. They had missed something vital. Thorne, flushed and increasingly desperate, was hemorrhaging ground. Her meticulously crafted script lay in tatters. But she possessed one final, desperate gambit. A question so intensely personal, so potentially explosive, that it could either salvage the interview or obliterate her career. She inhaled deeply. "Since you mentioned her unwavering support," Thorne said, her voice now harsh, bordering on accusatory, "for a woman who didn't actively seek this level of scrutiny, haven't you ever contemplated finding someone younger?" The studio descended into absolute, stunned silence. A few gasps so pierced the quiet. Even the cameramen, hardened veterans of countless media battles, seemed to recoil. Trump sat motionless, his face an inscrutable mask. The seconds stretched, elongated into an agonizing eternity. Trump slowly, deliberately repeated her words. "Find someone younger?" He paused, his gaze unwavering, boring into Thorne. "Let me elucidate something, since we're ostensibly discussing values. In the realm of business, yes, one sometimes seeks a more advantageous deal. But we're not discussing real estate here. We're discussing my wife, my partner, the mother of my son." He leaned forward, his voice resonating with controlled, righteous fury. "Genuine value isn't fleeting youth. It's the individual who remains steadfast when the cameras are extinguished, the one who speaks truth when everyone else is peddling flattery. True value is loyalty, integrity, and character. Concepts apparently absent from modern journalism curricula." The audience erupted, a spontaneous eruption of support, a clear verdict delivered. It was a standing ovation. Thorne's career flashed before her eyes, a highlight reel of ambition turning to ashes. She tried to interject, but Trump's voice, amplified by the moment, drowned her out. "So, no," he declared, his voice ringing with resolute finality. "I have never considered finding someone younger, because you cannot supplant the person who has stood by you through both triumphs and tribulations. She is irreplaceable, to be cherished, not traded." He turned his gaze directly to the camera, his voice now calm, yet imbued with unwavering conviction. "The problem isn't me, nor is it Melania. The problem is you," he stated, gesturing towards Thorne and her now useless notes. "You arrived with a preordained script, believing you could ensnare me. But you exposed yourselves. You demonstrated precisely why the public no longer trusts the mainstream media." He shook his head, a mixture of pity and disdain. "You traded authentic journalism for cheap sensationalism," he concluded by stating, with profound emphasis, that genuine love is not a commodity to be bartered or replaced. It is forged through shared years, shared struggles, shared victories. These are the true values. Millions of screens across the nation reflected the same image. A journalist's calculated gamble turned crushing defeat, and a defiant defense of values that resonated far beyond the political arena. The network executives watching from their plush offices were already calculating the damage.